Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Engineering and Physical Sciences Library. My name is Gary White. I'm the Associate Dean for Public Services in the libraries, and I'd like to welcome you and thank you for coming to hear our wonderful guest speaker, Dan Russell, who is the Director of User Happiness. Maybe it's something like that. He can tell you the right title. At Google. So we're very fortunate to have Dan visit us. I've seen Dan present before, and it's just fascinating. So you're in for a real treat today. So thank you for coming, and I know I'm looking forward to it. So just want to welcome you, and I'll turn the microphone over to Navinka, who is the head of the EPSL libraries. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming, and I want to welcome you in this renovated space. Hope you are appreciating the new carpet, furniture, and overall the arrangement. And I would like to thank Dr. Dan Russell for agreeing to be our inaugural speaker. Dr. Russell is a library advocate, user, and senior research scientist for search quality and user happiness at Google. That's the title that Gary was trying to say. And he will share his thoughts on the future of libraries, online question asking, and information search and retrieval. Russell's work focuses on understanding how searchers think of online content, exploring how they search and what they consider search success and failure. He's also a very good friend of the University of Maryland and the libraries. He has been affiliated with the University of Maryland Future of Information Alliance as its futurist in residence since its beginning. Russell earned his PhD and Master in Science in Computer Science at the University of Rochester and a Bachelor's of Science degree in Information and Computer Science from University of California at Irvine. Last but not least, Russell holds a handful of patents. Here at EPSL, we know a little bit about patents. We are a patent and trademark resource center, formerly known as a depository library. Dan's talk today is on the screen, The Future of Asking and Answering Questions, How Technology Changes the Way We Think. Please help me welcoming Dr. Russell.
Thank you. So I worry about the way people ask questions because in some sense I'm like that guy at Google that all the questions come to, who types the answers, who's trying to figure out why you are querying for the word first. I don't know why. But I think more importantly is in my job as understanding the guy who understands how users query and what they're thinking about, I think a lot about how people are using the information resources we've built. Because look, we have built a computer the size of a planet. How much of it do you use? How much of it do you know how to use? And so my beginning proposition today is we have screwed up. And I mean that in the sense that we have not only a computer that size, but we have vast quantities of information that are flowing into our lives every single day. You know this, I know this. I'm not going to say information overload because people in the 15th century thought they had information overload. It's true, right? So the question is, what are we going to do about it? So I've gone around and done a lot of sort of informal asking of students at different universities around the country. Where do you learn this stuff? Where do you learn how to do queries? Where do you learn how to use information? How to use it in your daily life or in hand-to-hand combat, whatever is appropriate. Where do you learn this stuff? And mostly the answer is we have screwed up. Even though we have created a huge flow of information, more information now than at any time in history, we are teaching our students less and less. Now, the University of Maryland actually is doing pretty well. You know, it's actually doing a pretty good job. But there are a lot of places, and I would say the vast majority of places worldwide, do not equip their students with the skills and the knowledge how to use all this stuff. So my job, the way I think about my job, is to really be a cyber, tribal, techno, cognitive anthropologist. And what I mean by that is I get to talk to people and understand how they really use information. Now, my focus, and the people who pay my job, is Google, but I'm really interested in information writ large. So how you find out information about the news, say from social media, or how you find information from books, or from patents, or whatever it is you do. I'm interested in how you do all that stuff, not just in how you use online search engines. But I'm also a software engineer and a research scientist, so I have a very particular perspective on this, because I build the software that you then use. And to me, it's malleable. To the external user, it's kind of fixed and unchangeable, and you have to learn how to use it. But as we learn more and more, especially through the things I learn in my studies, we can then change the tools. We can change the information. What do we do? How can we do that? So as a research scientist, I strongly believe that we can learn from the past. I know in the Silicon Valley era, that's a weird notion. But my perspective actually extends back farther than the last Unicode change. I go back beyond episodic, beyond ASCII. How many people know what ASCII is? Just checking. Oh my gosh, okay. 4/5 of you have no idea what that word is. You should look it up. You could pull out your phone, it's okay. Search Google ASCII, ASCII. My point really is that with technology like this, that is the pen on vellum, there are certain things that are being encoded and represented here, right? Think about this. What about this technology, both in terms of longevity, representational form, affect? How did you feel when you first saw this? Like, ooh, ecclesiastical, right? It's a little Latinate for me. It's a little, right? But now let's look at another technology, this one. Also the pen and ink mechanism, but you notice anything odd about this? Yeah, no spaces. We don't think of space as a technology, but putting a little gap between words improves your reading speed by 25%. That's a huge amount of time. If you spend, say, as a student, say 6 hours a day reading, 25% times 6 hours per day for the rest of your scholastic career, that's a significant investment. It also, by adding spaces, reduces the number of rereads you have to go through. Because here you have to figure out where the word boundaries are. Adding a space, which is what? It's nothing. But it's a crucial bit of representational technology. We don't think about it that way. But I assert to you that, in fact, a lot of these choices we make, sort of almost without thinking about it, matter qualitatively and fundamentally to the way we think about information, the way we ask about it. So I want to frame this in the context of, my kids asking questions, because you know how kids are. They see something like this, the aurora borealis, and they ask you, well, what is that, Dad? Well, how does it work? These questions are either deeply philosophical or cosmological or theological. And that's the way these things work. But I love these kinds of questions because how would you search on Google for something like this? What would you do? In Google, with the technology that we're building, you can ask what seem to be impossible questions. So, for example, this is on my office mate's screensaver. True story. My office mate Simon is a great photographer, and this shows up on his screensaver one day. And I say, Simon, that's great. Where is it? He says, don't remember. Photographers are like that. So I said, well, how are we going to figure this out? What would you do? Any ideas? How would you find out where this is on the planet? What we did is we downloaded the file and did a search by image. So that is, we took the file, which is called redrocks.ping, and put it into Google in search by image mode, and it said, oh, by the way, there it is. It's Red Rock Canyon National Conservation Area right outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay? Before search by image, doing that kind of analysis is really hard. It took us, it said 1.02 seconds. That's kind of a long time in Google terms. But you could see where I'm going with this. This allows you to ask questions that are previously impossible. The other interesting thing we found out is that his image, that particular image we're looking at now, is being used by lots and lots of wedding photographers in Las Vegas without copyright permission. Now, you think photographers would really care about copyright permission? They care about their copyright permission, not yours. It's just saying. Copyright is where you stand. Okay, here's another example. I was doing some filming up in San Francisco and sitting on a park bench. True story, all my stories are true. And this caterpillar is coming toward me. Now, as you probably know, some caterpillars are actually irritants. If you touch them, they will hurt your fingers, right? So I thought, can I touch this caterpillar? I used the same trick. However, if you take that image and do an image search by it, basically drag it into the image box, it will tell you, oh, okay, it's this kind of thing. But you know how many black and yellow things there are in the world? Billions, billions, right? So the problem is I had to actually modify the query. So I added these two words, insect caterpillar, at the top to say, Google, here's an image. I know it's an insect, and it's probably a caterpillar. And once I added those two terms, it was able to tell me it's a spotted tussock caterpillar. Not only is it non-toxic, but you can eat it. Okay? My point is that search by image is not just search by image. It's search by image with hints. You can say, hey, I know this is a caterpillar. Oh, yellow and black caterpillar, Google says. That's a spotted tussock one. It's interesting to think that we can now ask questions using a kind of conversational mode which didn't exist before. Now, one of the things, how many people here know how to find text on a particular web page? Just raise your hand. Okay, most of you? Great. That's good. You're a sophisticated, literate audience. Because this fundamental skill of finding text on a web page using Control-F or Command-F is something that I've found out that most people actually don't know. It obviously lets you find text in a document very, very quickly. For people who don't know, it's Command-F on Macs, and it's Control-F on the other ones, so you don't have to admit your ignorance. Now you know. But here's the key insight. If you ask a bunch of people to find out how long it took Beth Assange to run this race, I give you the web page. Say, all of you, here's the URL, go. How long do you suppose it takes? If you know Control-F, obviously it doesn't take long. If you don't know Control-F, trust me, this is about 100 pages long. It will take you a long time scrolling line by line, right? So here's, when you run this experiment, here's what you get. You get this interesting response time profile, okay? So here down at 10 seconds, you get a whole big spike of a bunch of people who can do it very quickly. These people know Control-F. They know how to find text in a page. What are all those people doing? All those people on the right-hand side, that's more than 5 minutes. Yeah, they're scrolling line by line by line. And what I find fascinating about this is that once you get out beyond 2 minutes, a quarter of those answers are incorrect. This is a trivial problem, and a quarter of them get it wrong. A quarter of the people get it wrong. Okay? Now think about that. If you realize what Control-F does for you, it changes the way you read. Imagine you're reading an 800-page textbook, and I know some of you are. Imagine being able to Control-F through the text. If you're reading it online, you can do that. Okay? So I did a survey. The numbers have actually, all of the base N numbers here have gone up, basically by a factor of 2. So I've surveyed about 5,000 people now. English, U.S. Internet users, 90% do not know this. Of the teachers, U.S. English K-12 teachers, half of them do not know it. 50,000 Firefox users, 93% don't know it. This means your mom doesn't know it. Your brother doesn't know it. So please go tell them, right? It will change their life. And what I find so interesting about it is it really changes the way you think about asking questions, right? Suppose I give you the King James Bible, and I say, would you find the first instance of the word Isaiah in here? Without Control-F, you're going to spend a long time, right? Or suppose I ask you this question. How many times does the word behold appear in the King James edition of the Bible? How would you solve this problem? I want you to think about this in a kind of computational way, because asking questions has now become, in some sense, fundamentally computational. That's what Control-F does. It scans through the linear list of text and gives you some answers, right? So here is a video of the very first time, it's kind of a world premiere, very small premiere, of the very first time that I tried to solve this problem. And this is a real-time recording of this. Not running. Oh, interesting. This is QuickTime. QuickTime can't support QuickTime. Yeah. I can't record, but it's fundamental to the talk. So hold on a second. I'm going to go over here and stop this guy. Remember what I was saying about technology? Yeah. Yeah, let's say that is temp. Hold on. 5 seconds, really? Who's got that kind of time? Okay, so let's go back to this. Okay, now I can show this. Okay, so now this is me playing. Yeah, this is really interesting. Well, it's going to be, well, we'll see how it goes here. So what's so interesting about this video that refuses to play, can I do that? No. Is that when you do Control-F using Chrome, it finds all the instances and actually will tell you the number in the upper right corner. So in the entire King James Bible, there are 1,349 instances of behold. But you kind of got to know that. Just as the calligrapher needs to know how to drag the pen at a 30-degree angle, and how often to dip, and how often to move, and what speed, the learned user of technology systems today needs to know what capabilities they give you. What kind of ink can you get with Control-F? What kinds of things can you do here? Now, it's not enough just to know capabilities, sort of at the fundamental or granular level. But you also, as a learned user, have to understand conventions of the culture. Now, I know every sociologist in the room is saying, yes, of course, of course. Technology is fundamentally a social action and it's socially constructed. Yeah. What I mean by this, though, is that if you don't understand our genre and media conventions, the kinds of questions you ask and the kind of answers you get are really different. So I started making a list of different kind of media types I could find on the web, right? Home pages, bookmark pages, calls for paper, all the accoutrement of, an academic life, right? But there's one in particular I want to point out to you, which is a spoof site. How many people know what a spoof site is? Okay, the rest of you, you've seen them, you just didn't know it. So here's an example. The Great Pacific Northwest Tree Octopus, okay? This is a site, first off, it's a fake. It's a spoof. It's not, there is no such animal. You got to know that, right? That hasn't stopped thousands of sixth graders from writing essays about the Great Pacific Northwest Tree Octopus, right? So how do you know? If you're in the sixth grade, you don't have a lot of world knowledge. There very well could be such a thing. So you, as a technology literate person, have to learn the skill of knowing what kinds of media objects exist, how they are embedded in our culture, and that spoof sites exist. Here's another one you might have seen, the DMHOH site. Okay, some people know about this. It's the dihydrogen monoxide site, which is all about the perils of poisoning through dihydrogen monoxide. You're university students, think about that. Dihydrogen, 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen, 2 hydrogen. Oh yeah, it's water. And the thing about this site is that everything on it is kind of true. You can die from DMHO overdose, called drowning. You can die from aspirating a small quantity of it in your lungs, right? Et cetera, et cetera. People do die by drinking too much of it. This happens all the time, so it's a little bit more difficult. You, as a skeptical reader, have to understand that these things exist. Now, this doesn't extend to city councils, apparently, because in Aliso Viejo, which is in the great state of California, city officials were about to pass a regulation prohibiting the use of DMHO in the production of foam cups, which, there's the link, you can go check it out. But more than city councils have been fooled by this. Okay? How do you know? So learning how to read critically is a fundamental skill in our world, partly because it's so easy to fake stuff. The cost of publication today is basically zero. I can generate a website, in 4 minutes, something like that, and I can put any kind of stuff out there. So when Sandy happened, this happened a lot. You saw a lot of images of the sharks in the streets of New Jersey. And if you did any kind of critical reading of this, you go, really? Really? You do an image search and you'll discover that the picture that's being interlaced there is from the kid's Facebook page profile, where he talks about his love of spoofing news articles by faking photoshopped images. It wasn't hard, right? So Alexis Madrigal wrote this really nice article about how he found it out. It took him maybe 4 or 5 minutes. The deep point here is that you need to be able to read and understand that faking images is a genre type. It's a thing people like to do. And it's really cheap. So Ernest Hemingway in 1965 wrote, which I thought was a prescient article, that every man should have a built-in crap detector. And he's talking about, in his case, sort of, how well things are written and whether or not they're believable and so on. But I think this is really more true now than in 1965. The cost of publication in 1965 was expensive and slow. Things tend to get vetted. Now it's cheap and fast. So let's think about this cultural embedding for a second, right? Because this is one of the functions of a library, if you think about it, is you have very talented people here who are more than willing to tell you how these objects, these books, these documents, these online resources are structured in our cultural context. This is probably my favorite example, because I know you all are literate people. You know what emoticons are, so you know what all these symbols are, right? You know these terms like ROTFL, right? And you know these key concepts like metadata and index and so on. However, not everyone shares your wisdom. On a QA site recently, a questioner asked, is it true that Rosa Parks would have moved to the back of the bus, but she was listening to her iPod? Okay. And the best answer chosen by the asker was done by Natasha, who said, yeah, it's true. The asker replies, thank you, I'll put that in my report, and gives her 5 stars. I trust you, you have the nicest avatar. What went wrong? Well, what went wrong is that the person asking the question didn't understand that emoticon, :P, which you all know is the universal symbol for a sarcastic reply. It's the tongue sticking out. You see it now? Got it? Okay. And then I love this comment here at the end. I'll put that in my report. I trust you, you have the nicest avatar. The beauty of an avatar is no basis on which to assess the credibility of a reply. You have to know this, right? Some people don't. Now, in this space of technology influencing and framing the way we can ask questions, think about what you can do if you know what these tools can do. If you understand, for example, the emoticons mean a particular thing, you understand the cultural context of that. But suppose I was trying to understand where this photograph was taken. Let me up the ante. A journalist gets this photograph, and a murder was committed in this office building. Where was the photograph taken? That's where the murder happened. How would you figure this out? I'll tell you what I did. There was no murder involved. It was just a framing example, right? But the question is, how would you figure something like this out? So let's work with what we have. If you look at the top of this office tower, you see it has that funny ampersand symbol and a TP next to it. If you do a query like this, TP office building, you do not get the toilet paper office building. But in fact, it turns out that you'll get Telekomunikacja Polska building in downtown Warsaw. This building's in downtown Warsaw, okay, first thing. Okay, so now we can go and look it up and we discover where it is. You can also do an image search, great, all fantastic. And we look it up, and in fact, that's the logo of TP, the phone company in Poland. Rock on, we're doing great, right? Now, how do we do the next step? So we can look up the address like that, we can use Street View and verify that's in fact the right place. The operation I did to figure out where this photograph was taken was to use Google Earth with 3D buildings turned on and fly to that point in the world where the images align. You follow that? Google Earth is a product that we have where you can click on a radio button that will then show 3D models of buildings, including this building. So I then flew the camera to this point in the world, in Warsaw, until the image lined up with the 3D model. So the 3D model is on the right. Now, I'm trying to figure out where the photographer was standing. How do you do that? Librarians, they never teach you this in library school. You turn around. You turn the camera around and look at the building behind you. And once you do that, you can figure out the street address. You fly to the bottom, look at the street address, you're done. You know where it is. Now, what about the office? If you look at that image closely, it's kind of buried right there. There's a little blurby color thing. If you zoom in on that, you, as literate readers of photographs, understand that that's a reflection in the glass. So if I take the image and reverse it with a reflection operator, which you can all do in Photoshop or your favorite image app, you can see that it's actually a Google office. So somebody's in the Google office at this location in downtown Warsaw. That's the query, Google offices Warsaw. And there's the phone number and the fax in case you need that. So we went from this crazy question with a photograph taken at some random place in the world, and we now know the phone number of that office. My point is that you need to know what the tools are and what each of those tools can do. Otherwise, it's like you're trying to disassemble an aircraft carrier using your Swiss Army knife. It's just not an appropriate tool. We can also ask different kinds of questions. I'll give you another couple of examples real quick. In this genre of hard questions, the example I just gave you used Google Image Search and Google Earth to answer the question. What if we ask a question like this? When it rains in Palo Alto, where I live, is it kind of, it bursts or more or less continuous? Or is it kind of like Seattle, or what's the pattern? One way you can do this is not by looking up the answer, but by doing the data analysis yourself, which if you can get the data is always preferred, right? Because you're not then subject to the interpretive whims of whoever wrote the article. So here's Seattle data for one day. There's Palo Alto data there. You can download it as a CSV file, plain old data file, drop it into your spreadsheet, and plot the curves. This took me 5 minutes, and I had to go find the data sets first. Okay? I imported them into a Google spreadsheet that said, plot that over time, you've got it, right? And you can see there, if you do a little bit of curve fitting, so I just add the smoothed operator here. When it rains in Seattle, which is when it rains in Palo Alto, which is the red curve, it's pretty bursty, on, off, on, off, on, off. But when you're in Seattle and it starts to rain, you're in for 8 hours. That's just the way it works. So you can now then do data analysis if you want and look at this over a long period of time. It doesn't matter. It's all like this. Palo Alto rain is bursty. And there's an interesting reason why that, and I will leave it as an exercise for you to figure out why is the rain in bursts in Palo Alto. Okay? You can answer this. So this is my deep question to you. How do you know what kinds of data you can get and how you can analyze it? My third example here is you can answer these crazy hard questions like, suppose you're at Wailea Makena in Hawaii on the island of Maui, and you say, what time does the sun come up? If you're there and use Google Earth, you can see there's a really big volcano immediately to the east. So the time the sun comes up is changed by the presence of that volcano. Oh no, now what do we do? You see where I'm going with this? If you know what tools are available, you can assemble a path of steps to go from no knowledge to knowledge. But you got to know the tools. You got to know what's available. So in this case, I know, as a guy who took trigonometry in high school, that I need to compute the angle theta, and then once I know how quickly the sun rises over the sky, I can figure out how long the sunrise will be displaced in time, right? Because it's trivial to look up when the sun rises at any place in the world. You just look that up. So now I got to figure out what theta is. Do you remember how to do this? I didn't either. So I got to figure out what theta is, but first I need to know the rise and the run. I need to know those two axes there. So how do I get that? Google Earth has this great trick. You can draw a line, in this case, an eastward pointing line from Wailea, and then go to Show Elevation Profile, and it will show you the elevation profile. That's a cross-section through Maui. And you can, I just move the cursor to the highest point there, and you can read, you in the back can't read, but I can read what those numbers are. I've now got the distance to the top and the height to the top, right? Did you know that? I mean, this transforms an impossible problem to a trivial problem. That's sort of one of the leitmotifs of today. So once you've got that, now I know it's 8.8 miles to the top of Haleakala, and it's 1.45 miles high, okay? And now comes the hard part. Mathophobes, close your eyes for a minute, okay? Because you need to figure out what the tangent is, and it's defined as opposite over adjacent, which I did by looking that up. Oh, I don't remember that from high school. Then I learned, I just did the division, I did the arc tangent, blah, 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 and I converted it, and it's going to rise 34.7 minutes later, right? Cool. Dan is a math jock, only in the presence of a Google search engine. Okay. But here's the kicker. I went out and I took the picture, great, I got it right, rock on. However, I realized later that was in fact a really silly move on my part, because I had to go work out all the trig, right? A better solution is to realize that there are probably tools to compute all this stuff, right? So here's a maxim I want you to take home. When you find yourself doing something difficult or tedious or painful, think, Dan said there's probably a tool to do this, right? So in this case, I searched for right triangle angle calculator, and guess what? You know how many of them there are in Google? Thousands. So I pulled out one, I dropped in the numbers, and there's the same stupid answer. This process took me about 30 seconds. The previous one took me 15 minutes. Okay? Again, the deep point here is the way you ask questions is contingent on what you know about the technology and about the data and about the culture. Here's the deep observation. This has always been true. It has always been true. If the technology was cards in a beautiful oak card catalog, you were using that technology just as much as you're using spaces in the technology of writing. Here I'm using the technology of search to find me the tool, to find me the crescent wrench that allow me to unbolt this problem. We also have tools that allow us, as you saw, to do search by image. But now, of course, they're built into my phone. So I can go, for example, to this location, Stanford campus, and take a picture of that tower and say, what is that tower? I can query reality through the agency of my camera. I can query reality, and it's got GPS, it's got the picture, and of course, if you do that on your phone, it will tell you that's Hoover Tower. And you can click on the website and read about all the great faculty there and what they're doing. So I went from kind of intent to a state of knowledge very, very quickly. Now, it's not just the technology, but as I mentioned earlier, it's also knowing the underlying data that's available. So what kind of information resources are there? Every librarian in the universe knows a lot about information resources. You need to know this too. Here's an example. This is for you, Ben. So on the right-hand side, I have the Wikipedia outline of the life of Leonardo da Vinci, right? See, it's got his life, relationships, paintings, so on, right? Now, on the left-hand side, I've got the Italian outline translated into English. Now, here's the thing to watch. It goes on and on and on, right? The Italians really care about Leonardo da Vinci. The English, the Americans, whatever. He's a smart guy, okay? So the article in English has 8,500 words. The article in Italian has 23.6 thousand words. They really care. Guess what? You should remember this, because you've got this Google Translate thing that will take Wikipedia articles and convert them to English, meaning you can go read in a language where people really care, where they really want you to have the full information. So if you're going to read about Simón Bolívar, don't do it in English, do it in Spanish. You get it? So this is particularly interesting because it means that one of the things that we have to adopt as a sort of personal style as scholars, as literate people, is that we have to be critical and be willing to do one more search. This sounds like just an attitudinal thing, but the most common failure I see among my students is they start researching a topic, they find the first result, and they don't go to the second result. They don't go to the second page. They don't do an additional question to disambiguate something or get a little bit different reading on a topic. So let me give you an example that you've probably read this book, right? 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. And a question I ask, particularly to English teachers throughout the world, is what does the title refer to? 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. The answer I almost always get is, oh, it's about that submarine thing, the Nautilus, and how deep it went in the ground, under the water, right? And if you think about that, you think, well, why not, right? That's the most common answer. But let's think about this for a second. Ask that second question. 20,000 leagues. Do you know what a league is? No, you don't. Have you looked it up? No, you have not, right? That's what most people do. It's a Jules Verne thing, right? It's a league, whatever. So what I did is I looked up the diameter of the Earth. I was just curious, and 7.9 thousand miles. But then I looked up the definition of a league. A league is an old unit of measurement, about 3 miles. At this point, you should go, wait a second, right? Diameter of the Earth is 7.9 thousand miles. A league is 3 miles. 3 times 20,000 is, oh, we're in trouble, right? So 20,000 leagues in miles is 69,000 miles. The diameter of the Earth, you're at 7.9. You're off by a big number, which tells me you didn't understand the title, right? So this is all by way of saying, yeah, we're all critical readers, but it is trivial to have your phone there while you're reading, Lord of the Rings and get the Elvis translation, or to understand what a league really is. So there's this concept I want to give you, right, which is what I call informacy, which is being literate about information, understanding what information is, where it's cut, the ways that it exposes itself to you, the kinds of ways that you can use it, the kinds of tools you can have. Because we are now in a time when we're building tools computationally that can do remarkable things. But if you don't know about it, you don't know what you don't know. And you don't even know what's possible. And so you're limiting yourself. So let me give you a little story about what kinds of things you can ask. You've sung this song, haven't you? Probably over here at the basketball stadium. Okay, stop. Okay. Anybody know the name of that song? Anybody? Do you really? Okay, by? Correct, good. So here's the story. My son loves basketball. And he sings this song every time he goes to Stanford. And they sing it, and it's a bunch of students, and they're all slightly chemically altered. And they're singing the song at top level, and my son says, I want that on my iPod. How do I find it? What are the lyrics? Lyric search, I say, is not going to do you much good. Shazam is not going to work, because when you're in the basketball arena, they're all screaming at the top of their lungs, and Shazam works with recorded music, not screamed music. So I think about this for a while, and I think, I work at Google. Give up. There's no hope. My son tries Shazam, and that doesn't work. And so, completely ignoring my advice, he goes to Google and types in the lyrics of the song, which are ooh, 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 ooh. And the very first hit is the song. So that's both funny and irritating to me. But what did I not get? Well, there's 2 things to learn from this funny little story. A, he's willing to try it. It doesn't cost you anything. If you notice Google's free, go for it. Just have a good time. Knock yourself out. So being willing to try stuff, and in particular, trying things that you see in the user interface or the queries that you want to try is completely worth it. It's a way to explore. Second thing is that without my noticing it, question answering sites have become rampant across the face of the web. And there are several QA sites, question answering sites, where people have asked, what's that song that goes, oh, 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 oh? And people have answered it, not with a weird avatar, but with Zombie Nation, Currentcraft 400, right? And that's how that answer gets into the web or into Google, right? I didn't notice that the information space underlying Google search had been modified. And I worked there. So unlike, traditional libraries where books have changed in format very slowly, when was the last big format change? The codex? Okay. We went from scrolls to codices, right? And then it was the same for several, 100 years. So the important point is that not only are information spaces growing richer, but we're getting new kinds of information, QA sites that answer questions that you have to ask. And this isn't going to work either, I think. But there's been some work for our colleagues at University of Washington and at Google where they've been taking images at well-known tourist sites from social media, aggregating them and straightening them out in time so that from one location you get a time-lapse photo of that location that nobody took. Nobody took it because it's thousands of people and their images are being merged together. This is a beautiful piece of work, and cross your fingers that the gods of QuickTime are going to work. Yes. Watch the trees change. This is Lombard Street in San Francisco. See the flowers? You're seeing 3 years of Lombard Street. Nobody took that picture. Or rather, thousands of people took that picture, right? So if you're interested in that, I encourage you to go look at the paper. They've got a lot of beautiful examples. You can see glaciers flowing and coming back and forth. You can see skyscrapers being built. Again, the agency is distributed across many people. Or another interesting document type is this satellite view of Earth. And you might think, I've seen that before. But this is the Himawari 8 satellite put up by Japanese Space Agency. And what they do, much to their credit, is they have a directory that they've got out on their web server, and every day they push out, I guess maybe it's actually every hour or so. It's so beautiful, I'm going to run it again. Every hour or two they push out a new image, and it's just a big long series of JPEGs. You, as a literate person, I assume, know how to go and download all those images and drop them into a QuickTime movie to generate your own time lapse of the planet. Now, this is a geostationary satellite over Australia, but you get the idea. These new kinds of documents and a little bit of metadata about them give you enormous capability. We also have tools that change literally the way you see. So this is an app running on my phone where if you point it at that sign, because I don't actually know how to read that, it will, for example, give you that image in real time. Notice that the font is as close as we can come to Cyrillic. The color is the same. I mean, this is actual live video. This isn't a still image that's being translated in real time. Not only can we do Wikipedia pages, we can do signs in reality. Where are we going to be in 5 years or 10 years? So I want to end with a couple of thoughts about some of these future directions. So we're building what we call the knowledge graph, which is basically this giant relational entity database where each entity has a set of relationships to other objects. So for example, you can go to Google now and ask for the lakes of California. There is not a website that has all this knowledge in it. We have extracted it from multiple documents and put it into the knowledge graph. So this whole list of lakes here is synthesized from multiple knowledge resources. Okay, you see where this is going? It's basically an accumulation of content of knowledge of facts that we can find out about entities, like, say, the University of Maryland. And this list here actually doesn't appear in any one document. It's synthesized from multiple sources and vetted and not checked and so on. Not by people. This is all being run in the background as part of our knowledge gathering process. Now, that's, as cool as that is, you're not off the hook as a human agent. We still need to understand how to read carefully, how to assess the value and validity of content. And so this was sent to me by one of my students recently, who said, you know, it's really weird. The EPA is writing about these really strange topics, like EPA gives guilty pleasure a new name. EPA offers paid leaves to employees caught with pot at work. Why is the EPA doing this? And so the question to me was, why is the EPA so weird? And so I took that and I looked at it for a while, and the first thing I noticed was it was EPAFacts.com. Notice anything odd about that? It's not .gov. You guys know about .gov? Okay? It's got to be a .gov. It's going to be official government in the U.S. What would it be in the UK? It's not .gov. Okay? So the thing that I did here is I quickly looked at it, and I asked my student, what did you do? And she said, you know, I looked at their about statement, and it said the EPA Facts is a project environmental policy agency dedicated to highlighting the high cost of environment. Right. It's a nice statement. You'll click on the about links, you can discover who's behind, you know, who's the CEO is and what they're doing and their projects. It looks legit. That's the actual EPA.gov logo. Notice any similarities? Right. So what's going on here? Cool. So I went to EPA.gov and I thought, well, that's kind of, that set off my Spidey alert sense. Okay. So I dug a little bit deeper and I looked up their street address. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because this is the kind of thing you should be doing when you see something that's slightly extraordinary, either unusual, odd, or just strange. So here I looked up their street address, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. I'm going to Google the street address. And I discovered that there's a company called Berman & Company at exactly the same street address, exactly the same suite number. This company does a lot of advanced marketing for multiple companies, like companies about big oil, big pharma, big food. Do you get a pattern here? Okay. How should I feel about their representation of the EPA, where they're clearly they're torquing the limits of believability here, right? This is the kind of skill and behavior we all have to have. It's not enough to know it intellectually. You have to actually do it, especially in the current political climate, okay? The actual EPA address is down there. They're on Pennsylvania Avenue, which is where you'd expect them to be. If you go look up Vermont Avenue, well, you know where Vermont Avenue is, right? And now you understand this is basically a front organization re-representing according to a paid political agenda. Now, sometimes this gets kind of hard. Here's another website. This is RYT Hospital at Duane Medical Center. And this is a fantastically designed website. They accept credit cards, they've got medical education, contact, everything works. And if you wait long enough, eventually the animated graphic at the top will change. And you start to read about male pregnancy. Male pregnancy? We're good, but we're not that good. So a little bit digging more, again, doing these same kinds of credibility checks, background assessments, and so on, reveals that this is actually a design exercise done by a designer applying for a job. So he or she spent a lot of time making this look beautiful. It's like the tree octopus. It's not a spoof site, it's a design demo site. Did you know that was a genre? My point is that we need to do all this stuff because even things that look really good can be misleading. And here's probably the best example. Did you all read about when Elizabeth Warren endorsed Bernie Sanders? Right. That's the right reaction. What? What? Now, if you look at this carefully, this is actually the New York Times on February 25th this year. Did anybody else see this article? Yeah. So the thing you got to know about this is there's a website called the Clone Zone. You can hand them a website, say, of the front page of the New York Times. They then give you a copy, a clone of it, which you can then edit. And so someone, as a spoof or as disinformation, made that fake news announcement about Bernie Sanders being endorsed by Elizabeth Warren. This made the rounds on social media, maybe not your social media, but there are 1 million people in the United States who believe that. How do you find out? In this case, you had to read the URL, and it was misleading because it was www.nytimes.com. You go, yeah, that's the New York Times. .clonezone.com/whatever, right? And nobody reads that far. Read critically. Because, we live in a world where a lot of this stuff is easy to get to, but we may or may not have learned the skills to understand how to assess it. How many people have heard of text spinning or article spinning? Anybody? Okay. I hesitate to mention this in a university, but let me, undergraduates, just close your ears. It's a technology, and you can find them by doing the obvious search. And what it allows you to do is to take an article, say a Wikipedia article, and pour it into a text spinner, and it rewrites it to avoid plagiarism detection. Okay? There's a whole industry of people out there doing this for what's called search engine optimization. If Google or Bing or any of us discover that this text and the text on your website are identical, we're going to ding you for plagiarism. But website owners don't want to spend all that time to actually write it, so they run it through a text spinner. So it rewrites it into an alternative, but mostly grammatically correct rewrite that will avoid text detection. This is a real bummer, right? Because all of a sudden, you will see the same article, the same content in the same article being rewritten, because you can run the text spun article through a text spinner again and again and again, right? This is why I don't want the undergraduates to hear it. But faculty, you need to know this. Because if you assign, say, a 10-page essay in the life of Leonardo da Vinci, they're going to take the Italian article, run it through Google Translate, and run it through a text spinner. Good luck detecting that. My deep point here is that you need to know that technology affects the quality of what you read. It frames the kinds of questions you can ask and what's knowable. So I'm going to show you one last video here. Oh, I'm not going to show you one last
What
video.
are the northern lights?
That's interesting. Well, what that video would show you is better yet, I know what I can do. I'll come back to this. I'm going to go to Google, and I'm going to start up a new, and I will just do it for you. Oops. So what I can do is go to Google. I'm going to show you the real version of it rather than the fake version of it. So I can do a search for, say, Aurora, and I'll get the obvious things. Now, what I really want to show you here is not that, but the ability to do things like this. I'm going to click on the search by voice button, and I'm going to say, what causes the aurora borealis?
According to Earth sky, when charged particles from the sun strike atoms in Earth's atmosphere, they cause electrons in the atoms to move to a higher energy state.
You see where this is going? Show me some pictures of the aurora borealis.
Pictures of the aurora borealis. Here you are.
So all of a sudden, we're shifting, and this is driven largely by mobile devices, where you can not only speak to them, but you can start to ask more complex, more sophisticated questions. So I want to argue that we have a lot of needs as information consumers, as people who ask questions of tools like Google, but you need to learn how to ask the right questions. It's possible to ask really stupid questions. There are no stupid questions, but they're ill-formed questions. How heavy is the Grand Canyon? Google will give you an answer, But you need to know that's a dumb question, right? And not only is it just getting the right questions, but we need to know what kinds of knowledge exist and what forms those things appear in, and what kinds of tools you can find and use, like the right angle calculator. So, in conclusion, I want to basically summarize this by saying, we live in this marvelous time, right? We've got all this tooling, all this networking, all this capability, but it still is upon us to know what's possible and where the boundaries are, and to be responsible for assessing the quality of the information that we receive. Thank you very much. Okay? So I'm happy to answer questions for as long as people want to stick around. Any questions? Thoughts, reactions, brickbats, plaudits? Yeah.
So I have a very silly question. The last section that you showed, you ask in your voice.
Yeah.
As you can hear, I have an accent. And
You wanna try it?
every time I'm asking questions,
Yeah.
it doesn't come out the right way. So is there any way that Google is working or no?
Oh, yeah. Do you want to try it?
No, not really.
Okay. So for a long time, my boss was from North India, and he complained about this all the time. Guess what? It got a lot of attention. So we've been doing a lot of modeling of accents. You think North India is bad? Try Tennessee, right? I mean, or another one that's really hard are Italian immigrants, because they add extra phonemes. So we've been doing a really, I think, pretty interesting and pretty impressive job about that. So recently, Microsoft, for example, announced that their voice for echo system is better than humans at doing transcription. And you can question whether or not it works for your accent, but for standard human at standard temperature and pressure, it works really well. So we'll try it afterwards. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
How close do you think we are for Google image search for people on social media? If I took a random picture of myself.
Do you use Facebook?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. They're pretty good, right? They suggest tags for all those things. So I can interpret your question in multiple ways. So the question was about how good are we at being able to. One interpretation is give an arbitrary picture of an arbitrary person, attach a name to it. So we have chosen not to go down that path. There are lots of organizations that do that kind of stuff. We said, we're going to stay away from that. So we have no code to do that. Okay, I'm sure that someone could do a really great job, because face reco is a pretty well understood problem. And under pretty standard lighting and so on, a passport photo, I'm sure there are agencies that can do a bang-up job with that, just not us. Yeah. Ben.
How does Google deal with the very difficult question when people ask questions that really shouldn't be given answers about, conducting terrorist activities,
Yep.
or violating privacy, or
Yeah.
racial or hatred? How do you draw the limits of what Google should do?
So for the camera, the question was, what are sort of the ethical boundaries on how we process questionable queries, ones that are objectionable in some way? And we've decided that we basically don't know how to police the world. So we basically answer every question you ask. We have some policies about, for example, suicide questions, where we will put up the suicide prevention number, or poisons, we'll put up the poison control local access number, or emergencies, we'll put the local emergency contact number. But other stuff, we just, it's trying to legislate ethical stances for the world, and we have to work in all the countries in the universe, and so we just gave up, basically, or rather, didn't give up. We consciously chose to not try to go down that path. We can talk about it later, but yeah. Way in the back.
One of the issues that you showed was how easy it was to spoof news, and validity is given to news, depending on how widely it's shared. But if you look at Facebook recently, they took away
Yeah.
recently announced that they were adding sources to a lot of news stories so you can see, whether something has a source or not. But do you
Right.
view search engines and information aggregators as having to take a more defined position on what is real news and what is fake news, and just keep out fake news
Yeah.
for the public good, even though it might be popular, even though some people might say, hey, freedom of speech?
Right. So this is an interesting variation on Ben's question, which is for the camera. Do you see Google as having a stance about trying to monitor news versus fake versus real and so on? So our news channel, the news.google.com, we crawl news sites, so they're blessed as news sites. Not every blogger gets to be in Google News. So that's our first order policy. The second order policy is what you said about sourcing is, let me amend it slightly, which is there are some news sites that have the ability and the permission to tag their news feeds with fact check. Okay, so it basically says, here's an article that has a bunch of assertions that are then fact checked by that organization. So, for example, my blog is not so blessed. My blog does not appear in Google News, no matter how many times people link to it. So not just any sources can show up in Google News feed or as a fact check article. So that's a different kind of, not curated stream, but as I showed you with the fake news article there, that never made it into Google News because it wasn't part of the New York Times feed. Okay, so we do a measure of that already. If you go to social media, though, that's a different business. If you go to G+ or Facebook or Twitter or whatever, that's all done by different algorithms, which are primarily popularity algorithms. So we don't police that at all either. Okay. Question over here? No? Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, say again?
Google News Clean, your news channel, use whitelist.
Yeah.
How many of your whitelist news organizations are English language, and how many are dropped in other languages?
So in the news whitelist, how many English and other languages? I don't know the exact numbers, but we have news sources in every language that I can think of, and a few that I've never heard of. So, for example, we've got a news source in Haitian Creole. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. So thank you all for coming, and thanks again to Dan.